you are the youngest of three daughters,
Yes.
and you're the family that you come from, a horsey family, or
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
tell me a little bit about how you first came to be involved with horses.
Well, when I was 7 or 8, my family took me to Madison Square Garden to see the Lipizzans, the ones from Austria. And I thought that was nice, really quite special. And so then I spent the next 3 or 4 years begging, pleading, and finally, the spring of my 6th grade year, I wore them down, and they said I could have a few riding lessons. And they just so happened to be with Joe Venorio, who had at that time been teaching at Kentucky Stable in nearby Harrison, New York. There was a top hunter jumper club right in Scarsdale, Boulderbrook, but my father thought maybe if you jumped you might hit your head or something. So I ended up at Kentucky, and that's kind of where it all began.
Now, the first riding lessons that you were taking at Kentucky, what were you? Was it? It wasn't a jumping class then.
No, he had all saddle seat riders, all saddlebreds. Some of the school horses were not. I started out on Stumpy, and the way they did it was his wife started me, Madeline Venoria. The way they did it was you were on a lead line and they rode beside you. And I rode Stumpy until I was ready to go in a class. And then I got with Uncle Joe.
Tell me a little bit about Joe Venorio, and he's been a lifelong mentor of yours, correct?
Oh, yes. Well, I thought he was God, and I never really much changed that thought. He was a wonderful teacher. One of my friends who also summered at the Vineyard was Elena Manis. Her dad ran the Manis School of Music in New York City, and he remarked, and I think it explains what was so special about Joe, he was just such a wonderful teacher. He was glad that his daughter got to learn whatever it was that he was teaching, whether it had been pottery or literature or riding. He was a wonderful, wonderful teacher. He was able to give you confidence. If Uncle Joe said, you can do it, you believed that you could. And oddly enough, you did. The Kentucky Stables was owned by his sister-in-law. The family included 3 sisters, one of whom was married to Otis Trowbridge, who was a very famous announcer in those days. We were surrounded by top hunter-jumper people like Gordon Wright. But Kentucky's where I landed just kind of by accident, thank goodness.
That's something. Now, a little bit about Uncle Joe's background, if you don't mind. Had he been a horse person his whole life?
He started out teaching privately the Fenbert sisters, one of whom won the Good Hands at the Garden, or maybe it was the medal, a private job. Prior to that, he'd sort of been all over. He had been a stunt rider. He did the trick riding for Tom Mix, I believe it was. He was just very good at figuring out problem horses in particular. And unlike his sort of arch rival, Helen Crabtree, he delighted in what I later call retreads, finding some sort of rogue horse and having the youngster work with it and, turn it into something successful. And that was, incidentally, a very important point of his teaching. He did not train his children's horses. the children did it under his guidance. And I have tried to continue that to at least some extent.
How would you classify his style of training rider and horse? Or
He had no formal training, but everything that he taught was dressage, but it was not delivered in such a stylized way, which for some can be limiting. But all of the basic principles would stand the test of time and do today.
at what point did you start instructing? Because that was at a relatively young age, wasn't it?
Well, I couldn't have a horse of my own. My parents were very sure that it would just spoil us forever if one child got a horse and the other two didn't. And sometimes my sisters, mentioned, you had riding lessons, we didn't. Not that they ever wanted to ride, but anyway, there was no question ever of a horse for me. So I figured out that the more I rode, the more chance I'd have of perhaps getting to be sort of good at it. I felt that I'd gotten a very late start. I was 12, maybe 13. So I started giving beginner lessons at Kentucky, I don't know, maybe 14. And I got to lead Stumpy then. And my family summered at Martha's Vineyard, and I was able to ride at an Arabian farm called Tashmu Farm, where, following the same premise, I just rode as much as I could, and thanks to the background Uncle Joe gave me, they found that useful. So I didn't get such a good education at stuff like stall cleaning, but I got a lot of riding.
You went off to college then, at a certain point.
Yes, I went to Ohio Wesleyan my first 2 years. It snowed for 36 consecutive days and I transferred. And I always thought, and I agreed with my parents on this, that, college was for college, not for riding. But after those 2 years, when I was looking at places to transfer, I looked at places like Hood and Sweetbriar. And I went to Hood. And that turned out to be a great continuation of this ride as much as you can notion, because the riding master, we had probably 50 horses, and he did the New Holland sales. And we had new horses coming in and out of that barn constantly. And once again, because of the education Joe had given me, they sort of made use of me. And so I got to almost flunk out because I was riding so much. Got to ride a lot of different horses, and most of them had some sort of problem, which was good, for me anyway.
So you were also kind of developing a bit of a reputation of the person that could work with the special horses. And was it at that point that you made the connection with Dot and Mike Britton?
Yes. Mike Britton spoke to the riding club about Morgans, because they had Morgans. Dot happened to be the director of placement. So naturally, as a history major, English minor, I, through Dot, got a training job, of course. That makes sense. And went to the Green Mountain Stock Farm.
Right. So this is your first connection with the Morgans, or had Uncle Joe had Morgans at Kentucky?
That was it.
That was the beginning.
I worked horses for Mike and Dot. I also worked thoroughbreds off the track for some other friends around Hood. It was hard to keep one's grades up because I was very busy doing a lot of riding. I did go back to Sweetbriar for an instructor's course and had a terrific experience there for a week. And while at Hood, met another of my mentors, Major James Martin, who was on the Army Horse Show team before it became the United States Equestrian Team. And he would help me with the problem horses and taught me a lot about dressage, even got me judging some local dressage shows, and just was a tremendous influence. He was very much cavalry school.
You do graduate,
Yes, I did.
and you move off to Green Mountain Stock Farm in Vermont. And
It was, it had, of course, been Robert Knight's, where the Lippets were bred. It had been bought by Robert Morgan Sr. from California, and he had hired Lyman Orchid to manage it. And I went up in the middle of the year. I got through school in January. And I was supposed to be there to teach riding, but of course Vermont in the middle of the winter, there was nobody to teach, so I just trained. Bill Brooks was there part-time, and Jim Borden used to come over and train a couple days a week. And there was a trainer for the Western horses from Wyoming, Clyde Roberts, and of course Lyman. And I also met Snuffy Sivert, who would later become very important in my little history. So I got to ride everything there because they, all the other trainers, you know, like to put the young girl who doesn't know any better on the on the horses. We had a couple that weren't Morgans that were kind of fun because they belonged to the then Governor Dean Davis. One was perhaps fondly, nicknamed Torpedo. He would rear so well balanced, just straight as could be. And I'd advance way beyond pulling lower on top of me like I used to do with Uncle Joe's stuff, horse name stuff, that Janie Murphy later ended up with. But you would land on the ground, the stirrups off, your feet still in the stirrups. He was sort of a challenge. We had a lot of horses come in because of Lyman. He had gathered together a school string for me. And when I arrived, he had amassed, I think, 12 horses for me to use, 7 of whom were stallions. So very quickly I met Dr. Bob Orchid, who came to make them geldings. And Pat was with him. And one of the horses that Lyman had selected for my school string was a horse named Jackson, who had a white belly, which in those days was not allowed. Nice horse, by Deerfield Challenger. And I don't know, they heard about I'd done this dressage stuff with Major Martin, so they wanted me to take it to the New England show for the very first ever dressage. And we did that. And I blanked out in the middle of my test, and I wrote them all by memory. I didn't have it called. And some guy with an accent I could hardly understand picked it up and got me through the end of the test. Well, that was Van Schaik. And so I then met him and did do several years of lessons with him as well.
Now let's talk a little bit about, that was Dr. Henry Van Schaik, correct?
Yes.
A little bit about, if you can share his background and his significance, because
he was a Dutch Olympic team member, and he had a Morgan place in Vermont, and he had a lot of Morgans and liked them. And when I was working for Bridal Veil, I would go once a week to work with him. His favorite line was he would sort of grab a hold of me and say, "I will mold you." And he did. I think that was a very valuable and lucky piece to be able to add to my education. We had also, a number of lessons, and that's where I met Anita Hoytsma, because she sent Lippet Tweed to the stock farm to be trained, because, his nickname was Speedy Tweedy, and he earned it, and there was a broken arm for her sister, and anyway, he ended up there for training. And then they bought this saddlebred, who was Mike Gobig's learner horse, and they sent him too, and then that all started.
So you intersect them at Green Mountain Stock Farm.
Right.
Now you also go back to graduate school at some point.
Well, I already knew the Hoytsmas, had worked horses for them. The stock farm was kind of breaking up after just a year or so. There were some problems with a manager they had in there, and then Lyman left, and so I went down to Orkland Farms, but I was just there a little while because I decided that though this horse thing was good, I maybe wanted to be sure I had something secure in terms of earning a living. So I went to grad school for my degree in education. I went to UMass. But I commuted to Bridalveil in New Jersey every single weekend.
So not to leave the horses totally. Now, so you got your graduate degree, and then what takes place
Anita
next?
called up the Rigid Board of Education, and I got an interview, so I got a job teaching there, which was right near Franklin Lakes. And I taught for Anita for 10 or 12 years. I don't know, 14, I don't know, a long time.
All right. And when you say taught for Anita, teaching riding instruction or teaching in the school?
No, teaching riding.
Okay. All right.
So I would get there, school got out at 3:30, I would get there at 3:45, change my clothes, and teach from 4 till 8 or 9, and all day Saturday and Sunday. And then in the summers, the whole shebang, every kid, every horse, went to her place in Rochester, Vermont. It was sort of like moving Barnum and Bailey. I mean, it was major. And the kids stayed. We usually had about 12 kids at a time. And we went to all the little Vermont shows, 1 or 2 every weekend.
The Bridalveil, the horses at Bridalveil, are there any whose paths you crossed that really stand out in your mind?
Well, that'd have to be Townsend Visual Ward. We bought him for Anne for equitation. He was a park horse. He was with Jim Anderson, and we took him home and equitated him. He wasn't a great park horse because he didn't have a lot behind, but he had an unusual ability in that he was a dynamite firecracker on the rail, but yet he could settle and do the precision required in the workouts. He would have to be, I think, the most outstanding horse we had in those years, but there were many. We got a lot of horses because people knew that the students would ride them properly and be guided and so forth. So people would say, well, take this horse and, use it for the year or whatever. It was there that I met Margaret Caramore. She did a clinic. She was a protege of Uncle Joe's, and Uncle Joe taught her to do the thing, where you ride and drive the horse in front of you. And she came and did a clinic for us and brought Claire Simpson with her, and that's how we got to all know each other. And then I ended up in this house because she lived next door, and she called me one day and said, "Oh, the house next door is for sale."
Now, during that time, share with us some of the girls that kind of came through and took the lessons and that were students that were Bridal Veil girls.
Ann Hutchison Scussel, who is Anita's niece. Ann was the first rider to ever pin in a national final on a Morgan. She won the first AMHA saddle seat gold medal. The following year, the hunter seat on the flat gold medal. She was a good rider. Carolyn Sebring, Carolyn Downey Sebring, lived across the street. And of course, she's married Harry, and the small circle continues. We're still together. Kim Germ Kramer, who now lives in Austria. I think those are probably the most well-known. Stacy Hennessy came later, and Kathy Walsh and Rob Marsh came later. By that time, I had moved and worked out of Tall Oaks Farm in Mawa, though Kathy and Rob did come and ride a little bit with me. Stacy Hennessy's mom worked for the USET and knew a lot about the hunter seat. And Kathy Peoples really, was her instructor, and she was very successful as a junior in both saddle seat, hunter seat, and western seat. And Rob, of course, is a trainer down south now. Those are probably the ones that are best known because they're still active today.
I wanted to talk about the fact that you're a winner of the AMHA Golden Reins Award, and I thought it was interesting that you were recognized by Helen Crabtree as being an exceptional Morgan saddle seat instructor, and that you've been called a classic teacher. And I wanted to know, what are some of the fundamentals that you look to impart to your students?
The fundamentals of riding are the same no matter what seat. I want you, when you go to college and you want to get on the college team, I want you to be educated. I want you to know the correct terms. And that's been a kind of a weakness for saddle seat. So when I'm talking about classic, I'm talking about classic horsemanship, so that if I send you off to college and you've been a saddle seat rider, in just a month or two, you can show them that you know the basics of classical horsemanship, going back to Exonophon, whatever.
And what would you define as the classics of basic horsemanship?
Correct horsemanship rather than gimmicks or trends or style fads. So, a lesson I do is use of the reins. And so we cover the 5 basic rein aids. And you won't hear anything different if you watch George Morris give the same lesson. Well, you'd hear some difference. But the basics are classically correct and the same.
All right. Are there any traits or skills that you look for in a successful rider?
Just one. Just one. Desire. If you want to do it, you can do it. If you have that desire.
Right.
The mind is much stronger than anything else. Determination.
Okay. And
I really believe that. Well, Anne, who had such an incredible record, is about 2 feet tall. Her legs are about that long. if she eats one hamburger, she puts 10 pounds on right here. Determination.
So that would be it. And then we.
I mean, she was, what my point is, she was not, some people think to be an equitation rider you have to be built a certain way. No. If you're determined.
All right. What do you look for in a suitable Morgan? Or a Morgan that's suitable for equitation use?
Well, of course, it varies according to the seat, and it varies according to the strengths and weaknesses and talent, skill level of the child you're looking for. But there needs to be an ability to hold up soundness-wise, because there is a lot of stopping and starting and circling, and that's very hard on a horse. And I think that's the main thing. Once in a while we'll get a horse that just, doesn't take to doing the pattern work, and we can usually slip them through. But if he can't hold up to the work, and if you're not in a big barn with a lot of horses, you may have to make the show horse even do some of the drill that the kid needs. And this poor thing, I remember one time, Mike Malinowski, we went through a workout 27 times. Now, no wonder JR is retired in splendor. And he did it with a very happy attitude. But that's what it took that day to get the job done. And the proudest moment of Mike's life is he beat Jenna Britt that day. Because he admired, not because he beat her, but because he admired how good she was. Well, I'm not sure who won the medal. It might have been JR. But not every horse can do that, nor, heavens, should we ask them to. But sometimes they have to. Many horses that we use for equitation, certainly couldn't do that, and we try to develop the rider's skill on not their show horse. That's the ideal situation. But we don't always have ideal.
Right.
I think that the intelligence of the Morgan, and I think that the people orientation that they have certainly doesn't hurt in choosing an equitation horse. But after 50 some years, I have to say the bottom line is if they can hold up to it soundness wise today.
Share with us what Barb Irvine of today is doing. You're an instructor still.
Yes. I don't take outside horses anymore. So what is in the barn is for my niece and my great niece. And I do lessons, clinics. Sometimes people do have me for a consultation. And I have been doing a lot of writing, which seemed like a cool deal because, they pay you to watch classes. But I'm going to do a little less this year because I think it's not so healthy for me to be spending 16 hours a day at the computer. I'm still going to do some, mostly focusing on equitation. And I also write a column for the New England newsletter called Ask Barbara. And then at the Morgan Connection, we started a column called Beyond Equitation, and Elizabeth Hobby's going to let me continue with that, and we're going to actually start a new one this year, which I'm all excited about. Columns are easy to do. It's those shows that kill you. But the new one is Beyond Walk Trot, so I can interview the little kids. And I'm very active in the UPHA, and I'm on the New England board. And just so I'm not too horsey, because I always had school friends who gave me some different outlooks on life. I do a lot in the garden club, believe it or not. And, well, see, my mother started that thought because she used to go off to these meetings. She got to dress up and have tea. That seemed good. What I didn't realize was you have to do all this committee work. But it's been a way to meet a lot of people who are different, not in the horses. And, I belong to a book club, and same idea.
Oh my gosh. Will we ever see a book from you?
My relatives have encouraged me to turn Equisize into a book. Equisize is something I started when I was in this multi-breed boarding barn. And basically it's, how women love to go to aerobics or whatever. So you do it on your horse. And it's kind of cool for keeping your horses in shape too, because they think of a mechanical bull. I mean, all I want them to do is just kind of trot quietly. We're not revving at them or anything. And anybody, any kind of horse, any kind of rider, and we do exercises. And they can help to improve balance, coordination, rhythm, timing. I just think I've been so lucky because I had some great mentors and I worked for some great people. And then when I got all hobbly, I found a way to still be involved thanks to Steve Kinney. That started, he was doing a clinic at Equine Affair and he wanted to use Rumor Has It. And Steve's very thorough, so of course he came and rode her, and and that turned into working for the magazine, and it's been fun to stay, as active in that way.